Well, let's go back to November 19th, 2018, and that arrest and very sudden downfall at Nissan. Uh, were you fellows as shocked as so many of us were?
Yeah, I mean, I remember very clearly. It was 5:30-ish p.m. I was supposed to go home and cook an anniversary dinner for my wife. And my colleague, as I was walking out the door, said, "Hey, did you see the news? They're reporting that Carlos Ghosn got arrested." And I think my most coherent response was, "What?" And I went home at 3:30 in the morning that night, and it was pretty much for 2 straight weeks of staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning in the office trying to figure out what the heck had happened.
Nick, was there shock in Paris?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a shock in Paris. It was the morning for us. Yeah, he's a huge name. One thing that I do remember, because you go into reporter mode quite quickly. Obviously, you have to try and get a story out, try and understand what's happening, and it's, usually you can at least reach representatives of both sides or make a decent effort to. And it was really, I mean, obviously we had one side of the story, which was the Nissan CEO Saikawa gave a press conference, and we could hear what the Japanese side said, but on the Ghosn side, it was impossible to get any information about what he thought of the allegations, about whether he was saying he was innocent, whether he was admitting to what they were saying he did. I mean, it was, in the early days, a very, very one-sided story. And Sean, maybe you remember this better than me, but I remember it being a big story when we finally understood that Ghosn was contesting the charges against him. And I think that was weeks into the reporting.
It was weeks until we heard directly from him. I mean, literally in the days after his arrest, it was a scoop when anybody got anything from the Ghosn side that said he was innocent, or that he thought that there was nothing to these charges. In fact, we didn't really understand what the charges were for like days. Wow. Yeah. Maybe like 48 hours. I think we were the first to get out any sort of notion of what was going on or what this all was about. But yeah, at first we had no idea. Nobody knew what was going on.
So after the scramble for the spot stories at the outset, obviously this is a story that is breaking in front of the whole world business press. So you not only have a very confusing set of circumstances, at least initially, but intense competition. How does the reporting knack kick into gear at that point to try to discern what really is happening and how you can tell it?
I guess I'll go first. I mean, look, like, it was just a lot of shoe leather. I mean, in Japan, look, I was calling through my Rolodex, obviously, and none of the normal sources I use within that company knew what the heck was going on. There was maybe 4 or 5 people within Nissan who had any clue what this was about, or how it came about, or who was involved. And just finding those people was literally a function of going through corporate registries, finding addresses, and then going to their house late at night and standing outside their home until they came home and asking questions. Like, it was just like a process of like elimination. I remember the night where I finally got the phone call to where somebody would tell me what this is about. It was just after I'd been standing outside the house of like the head of government affairs at Nissan for like 3 hours waiting for some sort of comment. I mean, that was the gist of it. So it's really hustling. This was like 90% of reporting is just working harder than the competition if you're going to beat them, and so it's just brute strength and sort of stubbornness in those early days to sort of just get anything. At that point, like, any information was massive news. They just sort of arrested the biggest name in the auto industry, one of the biggest names in the auto industry, and it was our job to sort of tell people what the heck had happened. And we had, like, none of the normal sources were any good.
So are you crossing paths with your business media competitors? Can you see them or hear their footsteps while you're trying to do
Yeah,
this?
I mean, obviously, look, like the Wall Street Journal, there are, a select number of publications that we consider to be direct competitors. But honestly, like the race was against the local press, and that's, being out in the bureaus, that's kind of what it is. I mean, Nick, I'm sure, is constantly chasing Les Echo and others, and I'm chasing Nikkei and Asahi and Yomiuri and Sankei and all these other.
I would say people like FT, Bloomberg, Reuters all did really, really well in this story. So
yeah, of course.
My answer to your question, Tim, would be absolutely. I mean, they were trying to do exactly the same thing that we were doing. They were phoning the same people. They had often the same reflexes. I mean, the issue was as well that even if you got through to someone who was willing to talk to you about Ghosn, or whether they thought he was innocent, guilty, it was often people who knew Ghosn very well, but who had no idea what he was being accused of, or didn't have any information. I mean, his family after a while were in the press saying, we think this is a coup from Nissan, but really they had no proof. I mean, it was very difficult, other than a hunch that this was the case, and so I think that made the story harder as well. But for sure, people we called, there were footsteps from competitors in the international press and the local press. I mean, yeah, it was a huge story, and we basically, that's all we did 24/7, and that's what our competitors did 24/7 as well. So,
yeah. Sean, I think in Japan you face an unusual sort of situation in competing with with the national press, and that is because most of the corporate reporters have these press clubs and such, where it's a very tight, insular sort of environment. Can you describe that quickly, and how you overcame whatever advantage might attain to that?
So the press clubs are interesting. So they have basically bureaus within all of the ministries, and including the prosecutor's office. And so a lot of the information coming out was from the prosecutor's press club, where you basically have two reporters who live inside the prosecutor's office, and at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. at night, after the work is done, we'll go up, to whatever prosecutor and have a cup of coffee with him and chat informally. And the foreign press has zero access to any of that. So still to this day, the prosecutors don't provide information to the foreign press. Everything we got was from other sources. So that was a huge disadvantage in the early days. And it was really where we sort of started to catch up and then pass the press here, was the fact that it wasn't easy for us, I guess is the way to put it. We had to work harder for it. So in the end, our base of sourcing was much broader and much more international. It wasn't just the prosecutors deciding to hand over, several documents or provide a half-hour briefing of the latest thing that they wanted to appear in the front pages of Japanese newspapers. So in the end, we got the information, but it was a huge, huge disadvantage at first. I mean, none of the foreign press knew anything about what this was about for a good 48, 72 hours. So it was really just picking up the phone, talking to people, and eventually, as more people started to learn information, or as the investigation broadened, more people knew things. And so there was more sources that you had that were being briefed and willing to brief you. And honestly, like any good breaking news story that's controversial, like you've got a competition for owning the story. And so, you sort of build that momentum as long as you're in the game, publishing stories, and people see you're relevant and important and they should talk to you. You sort of snowball slowly until you're the voice that everybody wants to talk to. And you sort of build momentum that way. But it was really just Nick and I, and honestly, several others at the Wall Street Journal. This was not just the two of us in the early days. Calling all of our sources and working 16-hour days, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, to try to stay on top of the story.